All right, the conversation continues. I'm Michael Dismuke, freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures, lead writer on Captain's Log, in addition to being a fiction writer for Star Trek Explorer magazine. Still so happy about that, along with other things. But again, we have today's all about writing and writers. We're so happy to have a guest today. But before we introduce her, let's introduce my co-host, Jim Johnson.
Hey everybody, Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG and the Captain's Log solo RPG. Also project manager on various and sundry other things at Modiphius that you'll be seeing in the coming months and years. So, as things continue on forward. So also co-host on this here show with Michael, 160 plus episodes strong, 4 years plus. Who knew? Who knew that we would go this far? But it's a testament to the fans for keeping the game going, and it's also a testament to all the amazing people that have joined us on this crazy ride, working on the books and the game and everything else. And our special guest tonight is no exception. She's been working on the game line for a while now, for on and off 4 or 5 years, maybe 5 years. Yeah, I think Shackleton came out a long time ago. So without more ado, I want to introduce Kelli. Introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you're working on, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kelli Fitzpatrick. I'm a sci-fi writer, and I've had the privilege of being able to contribute to the Star Trek Adventures line for several years. I got to be one of the writers on the Shackleton Expanse campaign guide that came out a few years ago. Contribute some sidebars to the Klingon Koro rulebook and write some mission briefs for the Discovery book, as well as some other projects. And I just really love the game and the world, and it's an honor and a privilege to get to be a part of that and contribute to that. I also write original fiction. I have several short stories that are sci-fi and speculative fiction and literary fiction. And then my first novel is coming out in March, and it is a Marvel novel. It is Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers Declassified, and it tells the life story of that character from the comics.
I have a lot of questions about that. I read it, loved it. We'll get to that.
Yeah, I can't wait to get the physical copy in hand, because I've got Dayton's book, and I've got Maurice Broadus's book in that series, and I'm like, there's a little space on my shelf, ready and waiting. It's like Kelly's is going to go right there as soon as it's out, and at some point we'll get to a convention and you'll be able to sign it, but I don't know when that'll happen. One of these days I'll sign up for shore leave and actually do it before their hotel books up, but don't know when that's going to happen, so we'll see. Awesome. Well, Kelli, so glad to have you on the show again. This is a great opportunity for us to talk to you about Star Trek Adventures and all of your other writing, because I know you're super busy, super prolific. You are an inspiration, as well as being a teacher and a mentor and an educator and a writer and just everything else that you are. So
Professor,
you are
correct?
What's that?
Is it professor now?
I do teach college classes, yes, as part of my job.
That's right. You just made a big educational achievement, which I want to call out. You want to talk? Just tell us real quick. I want people to know again the caliber that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, so I was a high school English and journalism teacher for 8 years, and then I went to graduate school for writing and taught English college level classes while I was a grad student, and now I work as a fellowship advisor at Iowa State University, and I get to teach honors classes as part of that job. So it's a really cool gig.
I've never went to college. Anyone that knows me, I've never gone to college or university, but you make me want to go because your classes are about gaming, and that's so cool. Some of them.
Yeah.
In fact, I think one of the questions we have at some point alludes to that. So we'll get to that in due course. But awesome that you are an educator. I've talked, in fact, I think on the last show I talked about how important good educators are, because when I was a youngling in high school, I had an English teacher and I had a career counselor, both actually intentionally encouraged me to do more writing. And being a snot-nosed 16-year-old, like who does that, especially in the 80s, right? Nobody was doing that, and that these teachers actually stepped forward and actually were encouraging. I mean, that was foundational, right? And you don't realize it until you look back and you're like, oh wow, that was really important. So keep doing the amazing work you're doing. I hope that some of your students have come back to you to say, here's what you've done for me and how you were helping me move forward. I hope you had an opportunity to get that. If not, I'm sure it'll come.
Yeah, I've had some really great opportunities where students have said, sometimes things that I didn't even realize were
Yeah.
meaningful for them, but that they let me know, like, yeah, this was really foundational, or it was really important to me at a key time in my life where I either needed like reassurance or encouragement or help kind of navigating that process of figuring out who they are and what they want to do and how they can really impact the world. So I'm very lucky to get to have that be part of my job.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. I love it. All right, so taking a turn then from academics and education, let's just jump right into Star Trek and Star Trek Adventures.
Yeah.
Per your request, we polled the general membership of the fandom and on a couple different social media sites, and we've collected a bunch of questions from everybody. I will try to remember to mention who asked the question. There was one individual who had 10 questions. I don't know that we'll get to all 10 of them, although these are all pretty easy questions. And but yeah, there's a handful of those, and I had a few, and then Michael's going to talk to you and ask you questions about the Captain Marvel novel, which is going to be awesome. So let's just jump into it. So and some of these I'll give a little color too, but I want to hear your answer first, obviously. Let's see. Oh, forgive me the pregnant pause. Okay, here's a good one. So before writing for Start, this is a question submitted by Ryan G. Ald. His question is, did you have a strong background in Star Trek and Star Trek lore before you started writing for Star Trek Adventures?
Yes. So I have been a fan of Star Trek since I was a child. I grew up watching Voyager and Deep Space Nine and TNG with both of my parents. They were both Star Trek fans. And then when I was a little bit older, my dad had this collection of Star Trek novels. And so I would just burn through those. And I was so fascinated by the stories of these people. And of course, the optimism that's in the world and the discovery and the just how interesting and fascinating the world building is. And so I was always kind of enamored with this world, and so moving into writing for it is an opportunity to find all those little niches within the universe that maybe haven't been developed as much as you'd like to see them developed, and to get to play in those spaces. So um, I within the last probably about 10 years since I've been writing Star Trek stuff professionally, I feel like my knowledge has gone up even more, like detailed knowledge of you kind of have to have a working understanding of just the basics of the Federation and the timelines and things. And so that when it moves from being like a fan knowledge to like a creative sort of working knowledge, that's been developed more over the last 10 years and likely will continue to, because every time you do a project, or at least every time I do a project, I have to do a deep dive on something. So even if it's just a little sidebar, that might be going back and finding all the times when that character shows up in a series and piecing them together or something like that.
Is that nerve wracking having to kind of the more you write Star Trek, having to know it better?
I don't think so. Because it's cumulative. Once you know a thing, like then I have a pretty good memory. So that's just kind of part of my working knowledge toolbox now. So I feel like as I continue, I'll just keep adding to it and get to go from there.
Mm. Nice. Yeah, it sounds like you feel like me, like when I get a new assignment or something, and I know that I got to do a deep dive on something that I need a refresher on. It's like, oh darn it, I have to go watch Star Trek. Dang it.
It truly is that way.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes you get sucked into like I really only needed to watch this scene, but like, why did I watch the whole episode? But yeah, there's just so much packed into this media, as we all know, that I can keep going back to the same episodes over and over and keep finding new and interesting things to
Yeah.
to pull on.
Yeah, totally, awesome. That's great. All right, so with that in mind, you so clearly you had a strong background prior, and then you continue to build on it as you go. Let me see if I can find a nice segue into it. So with that in mind, as you had this lore in your head, and then you were given the challenge to create your own species for the Shackleton book. Talk about, and Oz Mills had a question here. We can fold this in. Oz asks, how much of the Calmerans came from a design brief, and how much of it came from just your own brain's well of inspiration?
Yeah, so this was such a fun project. So there were about like five or six of us kind of who were writing the main content for this book, and Jim gave me all of us like this very cool charge of create a species that's new and interesting that can populate this expanse. And I remember us talking about how because it's a role playing game, we're not confined by the limits of film. And so they don't have to be humanoid. We don't have to think about the makeup budget or the special effects budget. And so we can really kind of go outside the lines of maybe some of the more standard aliens that we tend to see. And so I was very excited about creating a non-humanoid species. I ended up creating they're like a crystalline species that's made of water. They live on a water planet. And so it was fun to kind of just start with you can do anything. And so from there, I started thinking about like, well, what are some of the cool species that I really vibe with in Star Trek that I think are cool and exciting. And I have always loved the Medusans, who are like these beings of like they manifest as like light, right? When they're shown on screen. And I always loved the crystalline entity. It's just bizarre and cool and powerful. And so that's how I kind of ended up going in the direction of like these like kind of shiny, colorful crystalline beings. But I also just really love water. I grew up in Michigan around the Great Lakes, and so large bodies of water are very powerful and evocative for me. So I wanted that to be the setting. So that's how that ended up being how I chose like a water planet for them to live on. And yeah, then it just became like what's cool and interesting and neat, that they could do. They ended up kind of being a very philosophical type species, and so I got to do some fun things with consciousness and their perception of time, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'll let you know too.
Cool.
I know for those of you who have not played the Shackleton Expanse yet, I won't give too many spoilers because it's still as good today as the day it came out if you're looking for a major epic to play. But for my group, there was one cool talent that special ability they had with the time, which could kind of jaunt you forward, jaunt you backwards, how time reflects like water. And I'm telling you, you freaked out my players so well with that design because they died like 3 times in the episode, but it was actually a premonition 15 minutes ahead of when it was actually going to happen. So they had 15 minutes to prepare each time to avoid their death. And so like it was such a fun concept character that's beyond anything I'd seen in Star Trek, except now that you mention it, Medusa. Kind of along the same thing, but that was such a creative character. Definitely, they will never forget the Calmerans for that.
Yeah. Oh, that makes me so happy to hear because that's really where it was trying to, time travel is a very powerful kind of ability. So I was like, well, what if they just get to peer into the immediate past or immediate future? You're just getting a peek. And so that I thought that would also just be really fun in gameplay, like you said, because you can either do some detective work of like what just happened in this room or what's about to happen. So yeah, I'm glad it's working well.
Yeah, killing characters without having to keep them killed. It's nice.
Nice. That's awesome. So Kelly, you gave us a bunch of great information that touched on a bunch of these questions. So I'm just going to riff through a couple of these real quick, and if you want to add some embellishment, certainly by all means do so. So with and because you specifically mentioned the crystalline entity, when you were developing the Calmerans, and now that you got them, do you see any connections between them and maybe the Tholians or the crystalline entity or any of the other similar type of species that we've seen in the franchise?
Yeah, so I definitely I drew direct inspiration from crystalline entity like that it's just so new and different from a lot of the things that show up in Star Trek. So I was definitely that was definitely on my brain. I was not thinking of Tholians when I was creating them, but that is kind of like a really cool like a connection that I hadn't really thought of. But I also was thinking kind of like wormhole aliens of like they kind of manifest as something different that perceive time differently. So yeah, like I think there's some analogs, in the Star Trek universe that are kind of experiencing things differently.
Hmm. Yeah, very cool. That was a question by Ryan Ald again, and then his next follow-up question, which is also related. As you were creating the Calmerians, did you feel like you had a clear view of who and what they were and how they fit in, or did it take you some time to kind of like figure out because they're crystal, here's how they would fit differently? Like, talk a little bit about your thought process as you were actually creating them.
Yeah, so it was definitely an ongoing process because once you're committed to these are beings made of crystal who can change phase, like they can be solid, liquid, or gas, whatever. Um, like there's a lot of practical things that have to be solved. Like, okay, if they have ships, like how do they operate the ships? Like how are they going to communicate? Like this sort of stuff. What do their weapons look like? But those are challenges for any new species that you're going to make. But I think there were some unique things about because there were some ships involved in the adventure that I wrote for the book called Prism. And so figuring out like what do the ships look like and how do they do that, and then also if these are going to be a playable species in the game and you want to have a Calmeran on like a ship like the Enterprise that's built for more humans and humanoids, like how do they function on that? It's a block of crystal, so giving them little anti-grav levitator badges so they can like fly around and giving them ability to communicate and things was kind of essential to then make it realistic that you could have these beings even if they are very different. You can have them integrated into a diverse ensemble sort of cast and have it work in a variety of settings.
That's cool. Very, very cool. So that also touches, you pretty well covered Al's question. Al Spader asked, how did your creation process go for the Calmerans? I feel like you've pretty definitively covered that. And then there was see if I can bold that. Um, So I guess this is a step back a little bit. Again, this is another question by Ryan. As we were working through the Shackleton, the campaign itself, and you and Scott and Derek were developing your species. The vibe between the five of us when we were working together. Did you feel like that was like kind of being in a writer's room? Was it kind of just like being given assignments and going off and doing your own things? Like, you want to talk just a little bit about that whole experience?
Yes, it was absolutely a writer's room. It wasn't just like being in a writer's room. I think it was a writer's room, and I think Jim, you did a really good job of creating that environment and really encouraging us to bounce ideas off from each other and to collaborate. And Derek and I ended up collaborating quite a bit on our adventures and working out details of how our species were connected and everything. But there really was, it felt like we were all working on one big thing, and then we were kind of filling in smaller pieces individually. And everyone had different ideas, but the Tillicol like through line felt like it tied everything together really well. And then we wanted it to feel like you could pick up one of these adventures and play it solo and it would be fun, but then it's also part of a larger campaign that you could sort of do the whole thing. But I don't know, I think the idea of a writer's room is that you are uh, creating story collaboratively, but that each person is bringing something unique to the room that would be lost if they weren't there. And I very much felt that way when we were working on that project because we all had um, different strengths as writers, but also just different strengths within our knowledge of Star Trek and the sort of things we wanted to create. Our species ended up being all really different and really fascinating, and so yeah, it was a really great collaborative experience.
Yeah, I always like to remind people too that, those who pick up the book and see the stories, they don't have to be married to exactly playing them in any particular order. It's really about picking the pieces that they want out of the game and elements. Mixing and matching. So I just like to remind people that all the time. So Kelli definitely may have a concept for the characters. I had a concept, took it in my direction, but I've seen literally probably a dozen different directions they've been taken, talking to other people and seeing their play reports. So people should feel free to, do that. You give them all the ingredients for it, but they get to bake the cake, right?
Yeah. And it's cool because like, with the Calmerans, like we have just a certain amount of space in the book to give you a picture of here's how I'm imagining this, but then there's all these other little chunks of society that are not filled in the book, and that's somebody else could come along and say, well, I want to play a Calmeran, but I want him to be like this, and so they get to create that for themselves.
We didn't get to all of it. I probably got to use about 50% of what you wrote, thinking, oh well, when we come back there, we'll study their religion next time. So that's what's kind of cool about it.
I also love story hooks, like little one-line gems that you could like take as a GM and like spin off into your own thing. So I tried to like pepper those in there. Yeah.
They're there. Yeah. They became friends of us. We did ally with them in the end. So that's
good.
That's awesome. No, Michael, those are great comments because that means that Kelli and the rest of us did our job, right? Because we gave you all these tools and you're like, oh, darn, I didn't get to use more than half of them. Well, that's good because now you can go back and do another campaign and use the other 50% and no one would be any the wiser. And you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you've had an opportunity to use, everything or part of it or, whatever. So no, that's awesome.
There's too much for any one session. Any of this module, there's too much for one. It's like easily you could do a whole, you could do a whole Strange New Worlds 10 episodes based off the Calmerians if you wanted to, especially with the time thing,
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. And just going to what Kelli was saying about the writer's room, I think I tried to make that feeling happen when we were working on the Living campaign way back at the beginning of the life of the game. And then got caught lightning in a bottle with you and Derek and Scott and Dayton. And that was such a fantastic experience. It reminded me of being in theater and, standing up a theater production for 12 to 16 weeks. You're creating this thing with a group of people, super creative, super intense, and then everybody goes away. And it's over, and then you audition for the next show, and then I got lucky to have it happen again when Merrick Moyer and Al and Michael got together with me to work on the starter set campaign, the new starter set campaign that just came out. And I think Al, I'm going to have to ask Al next time I talk to him, but I think he did a similar thing when he was working with his writer group as the lead writer on the Federation Klingon War tactical campaign. I missed out on a chunk of that because I wasn't directly involved, but it's such a great feeling. And now that we're reflecting on it, it made me realize that it's a lot like putting a gaming group together, right? You get the right group of people together who are vibing off each other and connecting, and you just make magic because you're riffing off of each other. And the whole is stronger than the individual parts. And like if one person misses a night or something, then it's good, but it's not as good, right? And like I remember, Kelli, you were in my game for what a year and a half or something, and I don't remember anybody missing a session. I think we were kind of intentional of like, oh, let's just wait a week until they're all here because I think we had the knowledge of like, oh, it's not going to be as good if everyone's not here. So all you gamers out there, like if you can get the right group of people together, it's magic, and just like stick with it and have fun with it.
Well, and the same thing for the creators too. Was the gaming group that you did you do the Shackleton Expanse or did you do something else?
No, we did something else. Oh. I wanted to avoid Shackleton because like half the people in the group knew it.
We already knew how it was going to do, but Jim came up with some really fantastic content. That game remains one of the best I've ever played.
Where is it? Where's the play reports?
No, it's just for us. It's just for us. I think I learned. I mean, working on this game, I learned that there is gaming for a group and it's your private little thing, and then it's different if you're doing performative play intending to share it with other people. It's just a different vibe and perspective. And I've got all the recordings. I've still got all because I've recorded everything because I was taking notes in the eternal game master hope that the players would catch up before each session to refresh their memory. Didn't always happen, but that's okay because it is what it is. That's how gaming works. But I still got all those recordings on an external hard drive because there's so many of them. I have not had time to obviously go back and listen to them, but I remember a lot of very specific moments in that campaign that were just absolutely fantastic. And it was just such a joy. So I just, reminder to gamers out there, like if you get a good group, that it's treasure, it's gold. And
It
Michael,
is.
I know you've been playing
I'm
with your
going to be
group for
bugging. No,
five years.
I'm trying to on a side project. I'll be figuring out how to convince all of you to allow me to get my hands on those so I can subscribe them for our continuing mission site. Because I have this thing about memorializing it, but I do want to respect that because Connor Self came on a show and he talked about the sanctity of his group.
Mhm.
And he'll never do player reports. So I appreciate that. I'm not even gonna, I won't bug you. I'll ask once. You said no, I'm done.
You'll bug me. It's okay. Anyway, so yeah, let's see if I can wrap up any of these other questions here about the Calmerans. Here's a good one. Joe Eager asks, obviously he wanted to know more about the Calmerans. We've covered that, I think. But his follow-on question to that was, were there any ideas about the Calmerans that you wanted to include, but either didn't have space or got cut?
Yeah, so I wanted to explore more about just more about their society. Like, you get like two sentences, for per area of like two for religion and two for justice and whatever. So there's more of that I wanted to look into, but I also was really fascinated by the ships. So the Calmerans have these sentient ships that are formed from like the dead bodies of when they're dying. They can choose to, one of their final acts is like merge together into a sentient ship. And the ships have the ability to just go and explore. Like they don't have to be sort of used as vessels or objects of war. And so there's got to be fleets of these ships out there or just loners doing stuff in the universe. And I wanted, I'd love to explore that more. But I do feel like I was able to give like all the stuff I really was excited about including, I found a way to work in either through the information on the Calmerans themselves or like slipped into the adventure. So there's this, conspiracy theorist who lives on the dark side of the planet that you encounter in the adventure that is just a cool idea of like who lives out there if they don't live in the city, like where else might they live. So yeah, there's always more lore, there's always more stuff to include, but I feel like I got to put in a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, and I'll take the hit for the fans out there who want to complain about it being a challenge to go through that 300-page book to find all the lore bits for everybody. I'll take that on because just the way the book was structured, but also once we got into layout, it was so hard to find the right places to put all those different pieces of information because like there's some awesome stuff in there about the Calmerans and how their abilities work. And once we got into the layout, it's like, oh, it's not going to fit here where it should be, but we've got to find a place to put it in the book because I don't want to cut it. So we had to kind of like shoehorn it into another page and kind of make it fit. And it just, but I also remember that you and Derek and Scott packed a lot of information about your species into the adventure and even into the mission briefs that you wrote that were related to the species. So like if someone wants to really do a deep dive into the Calmerans, you've got to read the chapters about the species, you got to read about the species, you got to read the adventure, and you got to read the mission briefs and take that whole tapestry and stitch it together. And then fill in the blanks, get creative and expand upon it.
Yeah, and I love hearing anytime somebody contacts me and says, "This is what we did with the Calmerans." It's so cool to hear, like Michael said, like all the different manifestations of how these things work out. It's very cool as a creator to get to see people using the stuff that the little pieces that you were able to create.
Nice.
I don't know about you, but I personally thought they were going to pop up in Prodigy somewhere. They would have been the perfect. I was waiting for them to pop up in Prodigy.
I really agree that that's like the perfect, setting for them. Like the color palette is even like the same. So,
That was literally it. I think that's probably it. That lavender pink, which is behind you for anyone watching on YouTube, is the Calmeran city. I forget the name of it, but that's the city in Calmera there. But yeah, that would have been perfect Prodigy.
Yeah. So I have to ask then, Kelly, if the Calmerans could be realized on screen, would you prefer them to be like live action CGI kind of a thing, like in Strange New Worlds or something, or do you feel like they would be better fitting in something animated like Lower Decks or Prodigy or some other animated type of show?
Yeah, I mean, I would be utterly thrilled with either. Seeing them on screen would be very, very cool. I feel like the because of the color palette and because of all of the unique features that they have, I feel like animation probably is the better fit to really capture all the aspects of them. But that said, I mean, Discovery and Strange New Worlds have done some amazing stuff with CGI, and so I trust that if they went that direction, they would also probably look amazing. I can envision them like a Strange New World episode where they go and visit the Calmeran planet, and you can see
Yeah,
it.
Crystal's easy to do with CGI.
Yeah.
Crystal's probably easier than a humanoid, in my opinion.
Oh
Right.
yeah,
So
you think so?
I think it would look, and the color palette for Strange New Worlds is very similar too.
Yeah, it's very bright, bold colors.
Very
So
bright.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
I would be cool with that. I mean, that'd be awesome.
Maybe they'll let you voice it and you'll be able to have this like ethereal crystal voice.
Oh, that would be so cool.
Well, actually, Michael, you predicted my next question. The natural question would be:
Oh, I didn't know.
the Calmerans do get realized on screen, whether it's animated or live action. As you were creating them, did you have any particular actors or actresses, or did you have any particular voices in your head? Like these characters are delivering their dialogue, whether it's telepathic or some form of vocal. Like, did you have anybody in mind as you were developing the characters?
I would say so. There's a character who serves as sort of like a companion. She's a senator that helps the characters, and I think I had sort of an ethereal voice in my head for her. Maybe something like Tilda Swinton, very smooth, sort of style. And then for the conspiracy theorist who lives in the black. Oh
Gilbert
gosh,
Godfrey.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
like
teasing.
like
I'm teasing. That voice annoys me so.
I mean, oh gosh, you could do all kinds of fun stuff with this, right? Like, I love Ewan McGregor's voice. Um, anything sort of like deep would work.
James Spader is always a good
Oh
disembodied
yeah,
people.
yeah, that would be good. That would be great.
Nice. That's so cool. I mean, I think it's always fun to cast your characters, right? I mean, I do that with all my fiction. I'm always thinking about what actor do I have in mind for this character, and then subconsciously their voice kind of gets into my head a little bit. And that's cool. Very
Yeah,
cool.
I tell my players too, so they kind of get the vibe of the character. Her name always uh, slips me, but she's the Iranian actress who was in 24 the first season. She was in Star Trek Into Dark, not Into Darkness, the third one, Beyond, Star Trek Beyond.
Yeah.
Her voice, and she was in The Expanse too.
Mm.
She's like in her middle age. She's like 50 or 60 years old. She has this rough
Oh, she
Iranian
plays
voice.
Avasarala. Yeah, in The Expanse.
I love her voice, and so whenever I build a strong female character, it's like always her. And then everyone, when they hear it's her, it's like it changes how they interact with the character. And so I love when people do that in RPGs.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about RPGs and writing, honestly, is like you can cast from anybody, right? You can cast an actor who's been dead for centuries or decades or whatever, right? It's like, oh, I want Errol Flynn to play this character, and you do your research and like, okay, it's Errol Flynn, and off you're going. You could have Errol Flynn and I don't know, Zendaya in a scene together, and it works because it's all imagination.
I love it so much.
Okay, stop. You're riffing. Don't.
Sorry. All right. So one more question about the Calmerans, and then a couple of questions about STA in general, and then we'll move on. So the last question about the Calmerans, and this is a question that I put together, partly because we did Shackleton, hard to believe, 4.5-5 years ago, and in that time, so much new Star Trek has come out. Were we won't, I'm heartbroken about it, but were we to do like a follow-on supplement to the Shackleton Expanse and like carry the timeline forward, because like the timeline in the Shackleton book ended shortly after Nemesis, right? We didn't even have Lower Decks yet. I mean, or maybe one season of Lower Decks. I don't remember now. But so much stuff has happened in Picard, Discovery, 32nd Century, so on and so forth. How do you see the Calmerans having continued on after the events of the Shackleton campaign, after Lower Decks, after all the stuff that happened in Picard, season 1, 2, and 3? Even on toward the 32nd Century in the burn, like how do you, like, if you were to posit what was the future path of the Calmerans, where did you see them going?
Yeah, so in Picard, I am very interested in the the sort of ethics of artificial beings or artificial life forms. This is an area of study that I'm really into. And so I really like that plot thread in Picard. And I can see like the Calmarian ships, which are sentient beings that are arguably maybe artificial. Like, I don't know. But I would be interested to see the interaction of that with some of the artificial beings going that are happening in there, and also with the way they're dealing with the Borg, like in the sort of communal ships in the Borg. So I could see some interesting overlap
Can
there.
Borg assimilate Calmarians?
I mean, technically, they can assimilate anything, right? Like, I mean, I think, yeah, they could assimilate them. And I don't know what that looks like, though, because like Calmarians can dissolve themselves. And so, like, if they get contaminated with Borg, nanobots or whatever, like, what does that mean
Right?
for
Can't they separate it? Like, right? That's my thing. Is the nanotechnology has nothing to adhere to, really.
Yeah, but I think it would still be live, and I think that it could.
Right?
I think it would pose a huge problem. I think assimilating one Calmarian poses a huge problem for all Calmarians. So this is a major threat. But I mean, I think you could also maybe weaponize that. So yeah, that's really interesting. But then I also think that the way I built Calmarian society makes them they're very focused on unity and balance, and they seem like an ideal candidate for Federation membership. And so I'm really curious. They also have very long lifespans. So when Discovery makes the long jump into the future and they're rebuilding the Federation, I would love to see the Calmarians like part of that. Like it seems likely that Calmarian society is still around 900 years in the future, and so like how are they a part of the Federation at that point in time? Are they assisting in rebuilding efforts? What does that look like?
Interesting. And maybe, down the road, did the Calmarians have some sort of connection to dilithium, and did they sense something happening with the burn that they want to go investigate on their own, right?
Oh, see,
It's
that's
like,
excellent.
yeah,
Yeah.
Or are they behind the emerald chain?
That's funny, Michael.
Interesting.
The Prism adventure does include some like environmental disruption themes going on, so that makes perfect sense that they would be, interested in what's going on with the burn.
Nice. Interesting. So with that in mind, then Ryan also asks, is there any particular I hate this term. Do you have any particular Star Trek head canon that is important to you that you would be willing to share with the audience?
What does that mean? I don't even know what the question means.
So
Go ahead, Kelly.
I think headcanon means your own personal pet theories about the Star Trek universe that are not confirmed on screen, but that you just kind of hold as like, I'm pretty sure that this and this like are connected. So in general, as a Star Trek writer, like I adhere to real canon on screen. Like we have to just it's very important to keep straight, what's real and what's not in the world. That said, sometimes I like thinking about how there are interesting like similarities between, different entities or different events or that sort of thing. And part of what's interesting is like there are many times across the Star Trek series where some sort of character or entity like ascends to higher plane, higher mode of existence, right? Wesley Crusher does this when he becomes like the Traveler. Um, this happens to V'ger. Like this happens a lot. Where do they go? What happens to them? Where is this like other dimension, other plane, other whatever? Is it part of the Q continuum? Is it something else? And so I don't have like an actual, like coherent theory, but I'm, wormhole aliens again, like, all these things seem like maybe they're connected in some way that it fascinates me.
Have you been reading Jackson Colin Jack? Why is the name following on? Jackson Lansing, Colin Kelly. Have you been reading their run on Star Trek,
No.
the comic book?
Should I? Is this a theme? Okay.
It's basically all the gods unite,
Okay.
including some of the ones you mentioned.
Okay. This is
Nice. Yeah, see, this is where I was thinking, Michael, is I was about to be really cranky and say that this is such a missed opportunity for Paramount not to have a official short fiction official licensed Star Trek venue out there somewhere.
True.
I know the magazine just folded. We had Strange New Worlds for a number of years. Like, I wish that there was some sort of means for writers to be coming up with these incredibly creative stories and sharing them, because there's creativity out there from the fandom all over the place. And my first riff was like, it's a shame that Lower Decks has been canceled, because an episode with all these ascended beings gathered together talking to the koala would be fantastic, right? Like you got the Dwowd, you got the Q, you got the wormhole aliens. I mean, there's so many, like you said, there's so many ascended species. What's that conversation look like, right? I mean, that would be a perfect short 7,500 word short story to drop into a Strange Worlds anthology. And the fact that we don't have a venue for this is just mind-boggling. So
I know we need to make this happen, Jim. This is the thing that the world needs.
I know Dayton's been trying, but
they should just, it doesn't even have to be in print anymore. You can be having, like, it could be on StarTrek.com where you go get your fiction on subscription. Well,
we've thrown it out into the ether, right? You imagine it and you throw it out there, and maybe it'll come back to us someday. So we'll see what happens.
Wormhole aliens, please.
yeah, definitely. So Ryan, we're moving toward the end of the Star Trek questions here, I promise. Ryan also asks, so now that we are in this incredible Star Trek renaissance, we've got 5 series that have come and gone, or in the works, of we have more series coming. Last what, 8 years. We've seen more Star Trek in the last 8 years than probably the previous 40 odd years combined, right? There's just a lot of Star Trek right now. So with all that Star Trek, in mind, do you think you would ever get involved with a television or movie universe? And then, / would you want, I mean, of course you probably would, but like, what do you think you would ever get involved in movies and television, or is that not quite your thing? Like, where's your interest lie these days?
So I love creating story in any form. My primary love is fiction. So writing short stories and novels and game writing is kind of my favorite thing to do. However, I have some training in screenwriting, and I think being part of a writer's room for especially a television series would be amazingly fun. So if that opportunity presented itself, I would not say no. That would be pretty incredible. Particularly that collaborative aspect of it, right? Like you're getting to work together to make something happen. And I also really like episodic structure where you can tell segmented stories, and then there's kind of a larger arc going on in the background. So that part would be really fun. It's a very different mode, though, because when you're writing a novel, it's like you and your editor, right? And like maybe a consultant from the IP. And a television show is like a lot of people making a story together. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously, I would do it if I had the chance.
That's awesome. Yeah, if you somehow make it before I do, I'm going to volunteer to be an intern. Like, I will be happy to get everybody coffee if I can sit in that room and write on the whiteboard or whatever they do these days. It's probably digital now. I'm dating myself back when DS9 and Next Gen wrote it all on a whiteboard and knocked out the beats and figured out how the story was going. But just to be in that room, just to listen and to absorb all of that creative, stuff. But yeah, cool. And then I guess Ryan's last question to follow on to that, is there a preferred Star Trek era / setting that you wish you could expand on, either from Star Trek or Star Trek Adventures, or just all the different Star Trek that's out there? Is there a specific chunk that you would love to really sink your teeth into?
So many different chunks. This might sound kind of weird, but the like post World War III apocalyptic era of like rebuilding, first contact, I'm really fascinated in, and I don't think we've seen a lot because that setting is not what people think of as sort of classic Star Trek, but the how we get from there to here is a part of the story that I'm really interested in, and I tend to write some of my other original stuff is apocalyptic in nature, and so I'm fascinated by that. I also like early building of Federation, so Enterprise era stuff, especially like what were the missions that followed? You know, Jonathan Archer, like who else went out in the early days, and what did they encounter, and how did they build those things? Um, a weird little like niche for me is just the different iterations of the EMH. So I love Voyager's Doctor. I think he's just a great character, and they did several really awesome things with his character throughout the series where I want to see those developed. So they're earlier versions of his program are being used on a mining colony. Like, I want to know what happens to all of them. Like, do they ever, get labor rights? And he ends up in the far future defending, Voyager's crew and setting the record straight. I want to play more in that timeline. Like, the fact that he's an artificial being and he moves, he's not as bound by time, allows for some really cool things with his character arc.
That sounds awesome. Doctor versus Moriarty, that they meet.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Like, you do so many cool things with this character.
That's cool. Very cool.
Doctor.
All right. Let's see. So you've talked, you've certainly played the game quite a bit, both in my campaign and in other campaigns. The author 13 wants to know, of all those different, in all the different games that you've played, what's the craziest thing you've seen as a trait in play? Of course, traits being a key component of Star Trek, both first and second editions. What's the craziest thing you've seen as a trait in one of your game sessions?
Oh gosh. I feel like I don't know if crazy is the right word. So I've been able to play um with myself having characters like this and others having characters where they are either playing a blended character who's biracial or who has some sort of interesting biracial trait that complicates their interactions with other players. And I think those ended up being way more fascinating than I thought they would be in gameplay, especially if it was extended gameplay, during a longer campaign. So those are always really fascinating. I've run like one shots at conventions before where, a player's like, I want to be a Tribble, or I want to be, this character, except with this, I have this crazy object that I'm going to carry around, with me, this weird sword, ancient Klingon sword or something. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like most of the people I've played with haven't been crazy, in their choices. They've been interesting in their choices. So
I'll shout out one that I only know because I read Derek Tyler Attico's book and he slipped in his Vulcan Andorian character, and I'm like, ooh, what was that like during gameplay? We'll have to have him on the show to talk about it, but that is what my mind goes to talk about. He was a
master of playing that character because he understood the nuance and the conflict. And in that same game, I played a Bajoran who had some Cardassian traits because she had to have an emergency field procedure. So she didn't like the fact that she had some Cardassian, DNA, but it made for some really cool character connections when you kind of color outside the lines, so to speak.
That's cool. That's actually almost a perfect segue to Captain Marvel. DNA.
She's definitely hybrid. Jim, did we cover all of the STA ground?
We did. I think the one question, Misery of the Northern Hemisphere asks, how do we come up with backgrounds, talents for species, especially ones that might have had only one or two appearances? Do we have access to studio notes? I can take that. I mean, it's kind of a lame to get away from you for a moment and then go back to it. But I think Nathan and the other writers, I mean, I think we do our research. We look at what's on screen. We look at what's in canon and secondary canon to some extent, just to try to see what's out there, and we pull that together into a narrative, and that goes to Paramount for review. And if they have any questions about it, they'll let us know. To date, they've almost never had any questions for us. So that tells me that either we're getting it right, or B, they don't care. I know they don't. I know they don't not care. I know they care very much about Star Trek. So fortunately, I think I'm lucky enough to bring on the right writers, and they know what they're doing and they know their stuff. And if they don't know their stuff, we can always lean on Scott to tell us what we're doing wrong, and he'll set us straight, because Scott Pearson is our canon editor, and anytime I don't know something, I go to him and say, help, and he'll give me half a page of notes, and it's like, that's all I needed, thank you. So we do our research, and then we do the writing, and then we lean on the people that we know who know their stuff. And do we have access to studio notes? No, we don't get anything from the studio. Anytime a trailer comes out, or a news article comes out, or something new about Star Trek, it's as new to us as it is to anybody else, and we're like, now how do we fit that in? Like, how do we make that work? Because the RPG, any new product has a minimum of 14 to 16 months development time. So if you see something new on screen, it ain't going to be in the game anytime soon. Just the reality of writing it, developing it, getting it approved, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks for that question, Misery. We could segue into education, or should we segue into Captain Marvel? Let's talk about Captain Marvel.
I'm dying to talk about Captain Marvel.
Michael, I'll stop. Kelly, thanks for your patience on all these great STA questions.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for all your wonderful answers. I'm going to shut up now. I'll turn it over to Michael so that he can talk about Captain Marvel, and then we'll come back to me with just a couple questions about the writing life and your creative process, your creative juice, that kind of stuff, and then we'll go on from there. So, Michael, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Well, anyone who knows me, my first love in RPG was Marvel in the first place. I have to my left here, I have a closet full of comic books. Yes. I'm sitting here looking at my Avengers #1 that I have from 1963. Captain Marvel has always been one of my favorite characters too. So, but my first question to you is about this: is tell us about who Captain Marvel is to you. And then we're going to get into the book, which I read and but I really need to know and hear it from you, like what Captain Marvel means to you as a character.
Yes. So she is also, she's my favorite Marvel character by far. I think she's a leader, and she is someone who fights for those who need to be protected. And I think her trait that I admire the most is that she is doggedly resilient. Like, she does not give up. And that's true of a lot of superheroes, but Carol Danvers has been through a very unique set of circumstances in her life, and she's had to sort of just keep getting back up and keep reinventing herself and keep growing and keep deciding to become better and adapt to all the new powers and identities and things that she's gone through. Um, but she keeps doing that. But then, like, underneath of all of that is this, like, aspirational ambition to, like, know more. So some of my favorite parts of her life are the fact that she worked at NASA, and she was a magazine editor. And so she has this love and appreciation for science and for exploration and for the sort of pushing the boundaries of humanity, but also about the written word and about telling the stories of humanity. And so you've got this really powerful fighter who appreciates those two things that I also really deeply appreciate.
Yeah, the way you wrote it too, which I literally have her comics all the way back to the 70s. I have comics from there, and first of all, love all the costumes, one. But more than that, there was something that you wrote as a through line to the book. The two words were never put together, but I walked away with unapologetically confident.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And I've always, one reason I like Voyager is because you have all these unapologetically confident women on that show. And then Captain Marvel kind of so talk to me a little bit about that. Did you intentionally say, oh, this has to be put in here? I know those two words were not put together, but talk to us about unapologetically confident when you think about Captain Marvel as a character.
Yeah. So anyone who knows me or my career knows that it's very important to me that we have female characters who know who they are and what they're about and are able to be competent and be in the world and do important things. And when Marvel came to me and asked me, like, the task that they gave me was
Tell me
take
that
this.
story. Let's back up. Tell
Okay.
us that story and then answer unapologetic.
Okay.
So
Okay.
tell us how this even happened and then get to the unapologetically confident. Yeah.
So this book line that Marvel was doing with Ben Bella, the publisher, was like this. It's called the Declassified series, and the idea is that there's, for some reason, up to the author, a bunch of files on this character have been recently declassified, and so there's a reason for this character to sort of tell their story to the public with the assistance of all these documents. And so it's a book that's full of ephemera and found documents like mission logs and Avengers debriefings and photographs and scrapbooks and whatever. Um, so the the charge from Marvel, though, was we want you to take this, 60-year history of the comics of this character who not only had multiple of her own named series, but is a major player in the Avengers and the X-Men and the
Mhm.
Ultimates and all these teams. Um, and we need you to make a coherent story that sounds like one person's life, and it needs to have a through line. Like, it needs to have themes. It needs to make sense. Um, and so it really was like a task of excavation, but then also interpretation, because you can include every little detail. And so I had to really go through and look at, who is this person at the end of the day? Who is Carol Danvers? Um, but also, like, what are the traits of her that resonate with people and have resonated with people? Why is she this abiding character that keeps getting included in this universe? And
Mhm.
why does she inspire so many people? And so,
So let me back up just a little bit right before. So you said 60 years of lore have to be brought into one novel, right? What was that research? What did it look like? Like, if I was to look at you working on this, what time period? What was stacked on your desk, or how many computer screens did you have open? Like, what do they do to help you with 60 years of lore?
yeah, so Marvel was fantastic. There was like a whole team of people. We got on a Zoom call and they were like, if you need anything, like, just ask us and we can either provide you with that actual file, or we'll go dig up the facts for you if you can't find them. Um,
Wow.
and so I had to call on them a couple of times where it was like, I need all the information you have on, like, this in-world publication or like whatever, and they would just do it, and it was amazing. They're magic. But as far as my research, they gave me a subscription to Marvel Unlimited so that I had access to their entire history of all the comics, in PDF that I could just read. And then I also had, like, omnibuses of several of the Captain Marvel series, which was sometimes it's just more helpful to flip through it in physical, form. Um,
Yeah.
so, but then it really did look like, uh, folders and folders and folders of notes and color coded, spreadsheets, and, like, I had to make my own, like, database slash wiki slash whatever, and keep track of what was where, because I knew that I would have to keep going back to these key moments. And
Right.
it's one thing to, like, know it as a fan, and another thing to know every detail about it to the level that you can say it in her voice. So,
So you really are, and this goes along with, we should mention Maurice Brodus, who's doing Black Panther, and Dayton Ward, Iron Man. Like, you're probably some considered experts on these subjects now, which is that's really powerful. That's
yeah,
really,
it is.
really
It's
powerful.
wild. At some point while I was writing it, I had the revelation of, like, I probably know more about this character than, with the exception of a small team at Marvel. Like I probably know more about this character than almost anybody who's alive, and that's like wild.
I hope that benefits you a lot in the future. I hope you're called on a lot of Captain Marvel panels
I
and
hope
and,
so.
and stuff. So now, with that said, I want everyone to see that because now, because of all that research, again, that through line came through, which I'm calling unapologetically confident. If anyone has never read a Captain Marvel comic book, the only way I can describe it visually is if you've seen Avengers Endgame, when she stands there while Thor grabs his hammer and she doesn't even flinch. That is her stalwartly since the 70s, this character. That I thought that scene made me cry because I was like, yeah, that's Captain Marvel, sitting there watching the movie. So now talk to us. Now get us to how you define that character and how you hope it inspires other people.
Yeah, so I really wanted to try to portray Carol as, this person who is unapologetically, confident but also competent. Like she
Yes.
knows what she's doing, she's good at what she does. Um, but also that she can learn from mistakes and she knows how to adapt and reinvent herself. And that's a feature, not a flaw.
Mhm.
So um, the book is divided into, I think, 12 chapters, and each of them is a noun that describes like a facet of her personality. So,
Mhm.
there's a chapter called Captain. There's a chapter called Visionary. So I was trying to sort of characterize the eras in her life as she moved through her different personas because she's been multiple different superheroes. She's not just Captain Marvel, she's also Ms. Marvel and Warbird and Binary, and so um, I was trying to show these as different facets of the same person
Mhm.
rather than just a hard left into this is a totally different, superhero. And imagine, like, if we take seriously that this is one human life, like what does it mean to move through these things sequentially and then to get dragged back into some of the same stuff from before and then have to move forward. She's had some serious family trauma. She's gone through multiple identity crises, and so I've tried to set it up in such a way that there is an arc to the book that Carol kind of has some realizations as she goes through, but it's mostly
Thank
her
you.
telling her
I'm
story.
glad you said that, the realizations, because I was just about to say the way I was about to explain to people the way it was set up. It was like an interview, also, so it's like a journalistic interview, and she has these epiphanies as she goes through talking with the other person, which kind of impressed on me why therapy is super important. Because sometimes just talking and talking, and also you're like, oh, wait a second, that resonates. So you had these cool epiphany moments that I'm, again, the character I've read that I feel I know, that I thought I was a geek about them, but now reading through this, like, oh, this is, so I'm glad you mentioned those revelations. And so as you read deeper into the book, it's revealing what the word revelation means, right? So I thought you did a really good job getting those two voices in there. Were you talking in your head? Were you sitting there like in your chair, like, blah, blah, blah?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, so I love writing dialogue, and so the interview sections of this book are all dialogue. It's just a
Right.
conversation between the two of them, and both of them are kind of like a little bit sarcastic and whatever.
Hmm.
So that part was just a joy to
Yeah.
get to write. Once you really find that voice, and I've always loved Carol's voice, and so
Yeah.
it
Which makes
was.
me wonder now, you kind of opened the subject. Like, imagine if you were to write a series of books where where Doc Samson is interviewing the villains. And through that series of books, the villain's not that villainous after all. Like Stanley said, there are no villains, there's only fallen heroes, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so like you really, that's the first time I've ever seen that happen. I'm like, and I was sitting there like, oh, this would be so cool to interview all villains like this.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Marvel really gave me full reign to sort of frame the book however I wanted to, and so when I pitched, like, Carol's gonna be interviewed by one of her former nemeses, and
Love
they were
that.
like, "What?" Like, but I was like, "Just hear me out," and, like, once we
Hmm.
talked it through, they were on board, and I really love the way that sort of adversarial edge just, I think, maybe
Right.
elevates the story.
Which again was the confident piece. Like, how many people would actually let their enemy interview them?
Yeah.
that to me was like, oh, now that's bold. Like I
Yeah.
was just like right off there, I was like, oh, she's so again, you started it off with that. So I thought that was such a good choice you made, like a writer's choice.
Cool.
So on that note, I hope you don't mind, Michael. I'm going to ask.
No, please. Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more about the sausage making. Like you said that Marvel pretty much gave you free reign to do what you wanted on the book. So like, just looking at the structure of the book, clearly you had these 12 chapters taking, covering different parts of her life and her career and everything. Just like walk us through the writerly process. Like, you got the assignment, you got the gig, you sat down, you're like, okay, I'm going to write this pitch for Marvel. Was it them saying, here's kind of what we want you to do? Or was it more like, we want you to write this cool ass Captain Marvel novel, taking presumably you've seen, Dayton and Gilmore's, Captain America, Iron Man, and maybe even Maurice's,
Yep.
So, you probably had a sense, but like, how did this thing come to be in the format that it's in, like, outlining, plotting, like all that great stuff. Give us the dirt.
Yeah. So, this book is in the series. So the Iron Man book and the Black Panther book, and then Captain America was in development. But each of those books takes a slightly different approach to how they're telling the story of the character and how they're using those found documents and things. And so they said, we need to utilize these documents, but your framing device of like, why is this character telling their story, who has the documents and why, like that was up to me to pitch. And I knew that like when Carol first got her first solo series in the Miss Marvel comics, she is a magazine editor for Woman Magazine. She's working for Jonah Jameson. And I thought that's like, where it all started. She appeared as a NASA security officer before that in someone else's series, but I thought this idea of her being an editor would be a really good sort of reason for her to come back, especially since her nemesis was this journalist. And so because she'd worked for Jameson, I have Jameson hire the nemesis to do an interview, with Carol, and Jameson has pulled strings to get some of these files and things like this. And so that was the initial pitch that I gave Marvel for like, here's the framing device for why this book is like happening. And then after that, they asked me to put together an outline. And so for the outline, they were mostly concerned with which events in Carol's life are you going to talk about, in what order, and in what structure. So like, if you're doing chapters, breaking into chapters, tell us how a chapter is going to be framed. So like these are going to be interviews, different sessions with Ripley, the interviewer, is how I came up with it. And then I decided to have them move locations each chapter, and each of the locations are meaningful to Carol. And so then I put together that outline to make sure, they could make sure I wasn't missing anything, really important, and they could see kind of what I was about. I also had to say, like, here's the formats for the files that I'm going to do. So like, I anticipate Carol doing flight logs. I anticipate there being Avengers communiques,
text messages
between, characters, that sort of thing. So I made like a list of like my anticipated formats. And then also like, here's the adversaries that she's going to encounter and that sort of thing, and some other stuff. And so then the outline had to be approved by the publisher and by Marvel. And then after that, I had to write a sample chapter so that they could kind of see all of that in practice on the page. And so we could all be on the same page with like, yes, this is what's happening. This is what we like. But then after that, it was kind of like, write the book.
What was the length of time from when you got the job all the way to when it got published? How many months?
6 months between when I got asked to do it and when I had to turn my draft in.
Wow.
Several more months after that of like copy editing and, proofing and all of that stuff. But it was about 6 months, which is a quick turnaround for a book with this much research, but it
Yeah,
was doable.
I love the journal. I love when Marvel does comics that are journalistic edge. I think about Alex Ross and Marvels.
Mhm.
If you've read that one, if anyone hasn't seen the beautiful art piece that is, it's from a journalist's standpoint too about
Nice.
what they're witnessing as a normal human in New York, right? And so
Yeah.
I really like the journalistic edge on this one. It was not you think you pick up a superhero novel, it's going to be bam, boom, bizarre, and it's like, no, this was actually just an introspective interview
Yeah.
defining events that many of us have read in comics. So just a really creative way to frame that, really fun read from that aspect. Man, oh, go ahead, Jim, you have a question?
I just one more question, just related to developing the book and developing the outline, having access to all this great research. How much of an opportunity did you have to influence what pieces of art were included in the book? Like, did they give you just this huge, gigantic art dump of great Carol Danvers stuff, and you're like, oh, let's use this, put this in here? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this was one of the cool parts of this assignment was they basically said like as you're envisioning these media pieces, like let's say I want a shield file on the Supreme Intelligence. That's one of the things that's in there. It's going to have some text on it, but like I was imagining it's going to have a picture there too, right? That's going to be part of it. And so they let me like I just would take a screenshot of whatever picture I want from whatever file I want because they have access to all of it. And I put that in the little thing that I created and said, image suggestion because maybe that file doesn't work right with the, whatever. But they used most of what I pulled. And so I essentially got to like design these little things. Sorry, not design. We had a fantastic graphic designer who actually laid it out on the page, but I was able to say, I'm imagining a newspaper article. This is the headline. Here's the body copy text. Here's a picture and here's a caption.
You did the concept art. You did the
Like
concept.
yeah, like the concept stuff. I gathered all the pieces and then the designer did the magic of like making it look like a newspaper article. But I also had an amazing editor, Elizabeth Smith, who she had to go acquire all of like the high res images and actually make the files and make them available to the layout and the design team and everything. So I just got to identify like this picture of Carol would be great in this, thing. So yeah, it was super fun.
Oh, that's super cool. And just curiosity, if do you know, did they commission any new art for the book, or was it all archival stuff from the huge, available content of the character?
So we were mostly using all the available stuff for two reasons. That this is the idea of the book is that it gathers that rich history of the comics in a new package. So we wanted it to be art from the comics, but there were times when like things had to be adjusted or moved or adapted, and then so sometimes things got tweaked, but then also like all of the I don't know how to say this, but like there's pieces of media that incorporate multiple images in really innovative ways. Like the designers did some incredible work. There were many gasps when I was going through the thing, and I actually saw it laid out, and I was like, "How did they make that look so cool?" Like there'll be like a YouTube like
Mm-hmm.
video that they've incorporated multiple elements into it. So yeah, they did incredible work.
Nice. I love asking this question because me and Jim talk about the path to writing and being a career writer and doing such like that. What do you think? And maybe no one's ever asked you this before, so hopefully it'll stump you for a little bit. But what would you say most contributed to you getting to this ability to be able to write getting this privilege? Or not, I don't want to call it a privilege. You've earned it. So what do you think contributes most to you being in a position where you could write Captain Marvel, as your character? What would you, if you look back, you're like, oh man, I did the right steps here. I invested the right time here. What would you say that is?
There's so many things, so I'll try to really kind of boil it down.
Mhm.
So my very first publication was a tie-in project. It was the Strange New World story, and it took a lot of just unapologetic confidence of saying like, I don't have anything published, but I'm going to write a thing and I'm going to fire it off to this contest and just take a shot. So like the willingness to just shoot your shot, even if you think you're not at that level, you're not ready. There's probably people who do it better than me. Like you just never know. So like that is like absolutely essential. Um, but also like go find your people. So, I got that publication, didn't know anyone else in the writing world, and reached out to Derek Attico, who was going to be at Star Trek Mission New York. He was in the book with me, and I just messaged him on Twitter and was like, "Hey, do you want to meet up at this convention?" Um, and just talk. Like I'm new and I'd like to meet other people. And he was like, "Yeah." And we turned out to be great friends and colleagues, and we've co-written stuff together, and he told me about other conventions. And so I guess like finding community in a really authentic way, like
Love that.
finding other people who are on a similar path to you, who have passion for the things that you do,
Mhm.
that you can sort of mutually help each other, I think
Yeah.
is
And
hugely
putting the
important.
work in. Yeah,
Yes.
we've met you so many times that you've come on our show and stuff like that. And I kind of, we follow you on Facebook or whatever you're doing. It's like you do a lot of work. You're hustling out there too, right?
You do have to hustle. You do have to
Yeah.
just like be willing to work really hard. But I also would say that I've benefited from people being willing to give me a shot, at things. And so Jim did this when he was like, "Yeah, you can pitch for STA." Um, and there's been other opportunities where like somebody was like, "You know what? I see the work that you're doing, and I think that you're going to make good on this, so I'm going to take a chance." Um, and that's kind of what it's all about.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say, normally we talk only about Star Trek on this adventures, but I don't know. I'm not going to say normally. We actually do talk about the range that the guests come on, and so it's a crowning achievement. One, not only to write for Star Trek, which you did, but now to write for Marvel. It's like, oh my god, you got.
I know. I feel so lucky, and like I hope there's many more things I get to write in my life. But
Mhm.
these two are, are always going
Yeah.
to be like, okay, these are pretty awesome.
And I want to talk about the other stuff you're doing for yourself too. Can we talk about the non-major IP stuff? Because really that's what I want to, I'm looking forward to seeing that
Yeah, yeah,
really,
yeah.
where you're unbounded and unfettered from these other IPs. What are we looking forward to?
Yeah, so I have enjoyed writing short stories, primarily science fiction, over the past several years for different anthologies. I've gotten to write some cyberpunk. I got to write a space western about a rogue space tractor for Bane. I
I read
have
that
been,
one. I read that.
yeah,
That was really good. Yeah.
I love that. I love
I
that
have it.
story.
It's in an anthology, isn't it?
Yep,
Yeah, I
it's
picked
an
that up. Yeah.
anthology.
Mhm.
Um, and so now I'm working on some original novels. And so I've got a science fiction novel that is near future apocalyptic that is almost done and hopefully will be in the world soon to get to share with folks. But I'm really enjoying creating my own original worlds and spaces and characters.
That's great. Pick it up, everyone. Pick it up. We'll be looking
So,
for.
so related question. I mean, you pretty much covered it, but I'm just curious. You clearly you have experience working on major IPs. Star Trek, Marvel, others, and you've also got your own passion projects and your novels and your short stories and stuff. If you had a dream project that you could work on, whether it's an IP or it's your own stuff, because your own stuff is certainly a dream project. Certainly, I mean, my own stuff is my dream project. But if there's like one thing that you would love to have on your plate to really sink your teeth into, are you able to share, willing to share? Like what would that look like? Throw it out into the ether and make it happen.
um, Star Trek novel for pocketbooks is on my bucket list. If that ends up being a thing that I get to do, and I would love to write just a female character. I've got my list of Janeway and Seven are some of my favorite characters, but there's a lot of awesome characters in the new shows and in Discovery and Strange New Worlds that I would love to get to write. So I'm hoping that Star Trek novel is in my future at some point. That's probably my big dream project. I also would like to write for the Star Wars universe in some fashion. That's kind of my. If I get to do that one, man, I might have to just retire because, like, I'll have written for
That's your
three major.
trifecta.
Yes, my trifecta.
Please don't retire. We need your voice. And
you're just starting.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny because I said a quote earlier. You're not just starting. Frank Oz says it takes 20 years to be an overnight success. Something like that. But I want people to appreciate. That's why I asked you the question. Is you're not just starting. It took a lot of work to get here.
Yeah.
I want people to appreciate that. If you really want to write, start now.
Yes,
Right,
start now. It takes several years to just figure out what you're doing, and then to move on from there. So I've been writing professionally since 2016, but I mean I was writing just my own stuff, for a few years before that. So it's been a journey. But yeah, for my own stuff, I want an original sci-fi novel that I can publish, and then I have this epic fantasy series kicking around in my head that will hopefully be a thing. But I got a couple other books I wanna write first before we get to that. So
interesting.
Keep a big catalog. Do it all.
In fact, Michael, I think you talked about having a series in you somewhere, didn't you? At one point.
Oh, what?
Did you not talk about having a series in you at some point? I can't remember. Maybe that was me.
I mean,
like a book series that you want to write?
Like a book series?
I mean, I've already written the first one and sent it off to the editor, and now it's all for the agent at this point.
Yeah. Epic fantasy scares me, honestly, still, because like I remember Mumble years ago, I wrote a rough draft of a fantasy novel, and then I outlined the next 6 in the series, and it got so complex and convoluted that I looked at it and I'm like, I don't have the skill set right now to do this. I need more time in just like fingers fingers on the keyboard, and I've still got the box manuscript sitting on my shelf. I'm like, oh, I should do that someday, but I'm just not there yet. I don't feel like I have the confidence to do it.
You brought it up, and so Kelly, you're going to give him some encouragement. I'm going to give him some encouragement. I actually went so simple. I felt I went stupid simple. I was like, you know what? No one knows this anyways. It's totally new technology. Let me just go so simple. And so far, the feedback I got from a concept editor and some beta test readers, they built up my confidence more than I was. I was like, I felt that. I think I told you this to Jim and Kelly. I want you to talk about it because you're working on yours. I knew I was writing my worst book ever. What I mean by that is I know 10 years from now, I'm going to look back and hate
it. Yeah. Right? But I don't think that'll mean that it's bad. I think it just means that it won't be reflective of who you are as a writer, at that time. Right. So like, you got to remember that like, if something gets published, it is already like good. Like people don't publish things that are not good. So yeah, it's, but yeah, it's exciting to get to put your own stuff out into the world.
And I know the circle has a lot to like, again, you're colleagues with Dayton Ward, friends with Derek Tyler Attico. And I know both those people have encouraged me, as you have, to just get it done and push. And I know I'm pushing Jim all the time to, and I think that's what you said is you have to find community.
Yeah.
And that's part of success too, right?
Yeah. So like the kind of self-awareness that Jim is talking about resonates with me a lot, because that's why my epic fantasy series isn't written yet, because I knew I didn't have the skills at the time. I think I'm coming up on, okay, I probably got them now. So, but then there's other pieces to it. Like if you have the skills, for me, I need like the motivation and the sort of like, it helps to have accountability. Like if you're in a community of writers who are all working on a thing, I had this built in when I was in my MFA program, but it's also very easy to just put together writing groups and little communities of your own to just kind of encourage each other, because I don't know, people say writing is a solitary act. I think it's a community act that requires solitary action. Like, I don't know that I would have succeeded on writing. I was writing the Marvel book while I was writing a sci-fi book for grad school at the same time. I don't think I would have succeeded at that writing 2 books in 6 months if I didn't have those communities like around me supporting me, and so we do that for each other. It's an integral part of the process.
That's amazing. Such good advice. Where can people keep up with you and follow everything that you do?
Yeah, so my website is my name, Kelly with an I, Fitzpatrick.com. And I update my publications where you'll find me at conventions and have a blog about, publications and stuff that are coming out. And then these days, my social media is on Blue Sky. So I am at Kelli Fitz Writes. And I will post updates and like interacting with people and such. So you can find me there.
All right. And of course, we'll always have you back here to talk about your achievements. I really got to encourage people to pick up the Captain Marvel book. So worth it. It's such a good read.
Please do. And please then at me on Blue Sky and tell me what you thought, because I love hearing people's.
I'm not on Blue Sky, so I'm going to have to go onto Amazon and write a review.
Write a review. That would be fantastic too.
I'll do that. We got to support each other, nice. and all that as writers. Good.
You need to get on Blue Sky, Michael. Twitter's a dumpster fire.
I'm not on Twitter either. I'm on Facebook and Discord. I know, but you know what? I got when I got off Facebook, and this is for maybe writers, and it conflicts with our need to promote. But honestly, I got my book done because I got off social media.
Yeah. You got to know how to put a box around that stuff.
Yeah. And so I said, I'm sacrificing maybe a little marketing and stuff like that, but I need the joy of completing manuscripts. I don't need the joy of being paranoid over social media. So I'm literally only on Facebook or Discord now, really. LinkedIn, of course. But
well, I will just say, not to plug Blue Sky necessarily, but it is a much different vibe than Twitter or X. And there are some very excellent people on Blue Sky that are writing, and they're not even talking about necessarily the craft or they're just commiserating with each other, kind of like what Kelly was saying about finding a community of writers to interact with. And I found it much more beneficial than Twix or X or whatever you want to call it.
Jim says this on January 13, 2025. I promise you that someone rich is really going to ruin it in the future, and I'm going to hold him to saying this.
Let's hope not, Michael.
Said this about Facebook, X. They said about everything, and eventually it gets whatever.
Maybe we should just make our own Discord for a writer group and just call it good and focus on that then.
Yeah. All right. So let's do our gratitude, our normal gratitude going around. Why don't you start, Kelly?
Oh my goodness. I am so grateful to get to contribute to these universes that I love, that have impacted my life and inspired me, and that I get to make content that will hopefully inspire other people, and that I have been lucky to have teams of people helping me through the publication process and folks who decided they were going to give me a shot. And I am humbled and honored, and will hopefully continue to do right by them as I continue in my career.
Very nice. Very nice. My gratitude is going to go to Trek Talks this week. The reason why is we were supposed to be, this is coming out on February 14th, this episode, which would have been past the date when they were going to do their telethon. They were going to do, or it was on, I just aged myself, didn't I? It was going to be on YouTube. It was going to be a thon. It was a YouTube-a-thon. So they canceled it because of the Los Angeles fires, of course, which is totally appropriate because so many people in the community are affected down there. So I just want to give the gratitude for people who are giving to any kind of disaster, the most recent one being those in Southern California, and ask people to stay tuned because they will be having the Trek Talks YouTube-a-thon later on. They're going to postpone it, but I love people who know their priorities. So thank you for that. And we hope everybody does well and rebuilds in time. Jim?
Yeah, my gratitude first, just because it's top of mind, present in the world right now. My heart and gratitude go out to all of the helpers out there in the world who are fighting the fires, taking care of the disenfranchised, taking care of the people who suddenly have nothing. Right? They had a life and they had a home, and now they've got literally nothing. And in fact, I read there was one person who's been a longtime musician. All of his prized, beautiful guitars and sitars and everything just all went completely up in flames, and his entire career is coming to a screeching halt because it's all gone. So
I want to add something to that too, because people know I work in the affordable housing industry. And though the media may focus on these rich superstars who lost their homes, and that may jade some people, that's not the majority of people affected. A lot of those people are families who struggle to earn their homes in places in those communities where inflation has tripled. They couldn't even buy their houses now if they tried. And they've just lost things that they had paid for 30, 40 years ago, legacy families in very racially mixed neighborhoods too. You know, it's very interesting that part of California, in addition to all the stores that burned down with workers, with blue collar workers who now lost their apartment buildings. So be careful where the media chooses to focus on because of glam. There are lots of working families that have been affected by this fire.
Yeah. So everybody who's putting the hard work in, and even the people all around the world who are donating to help, whether it's money or material or whatever. So thanks to all of you. I mean, I'm on the other coast and hardly even connected to it, but I can feel it. And I think a lot of people know people that have been involved. So heart goes out to everybody there. And then my gratitude also goes to Kelli for being here and sharing your time, sharing your knowledge, sharing your inspiration. Not just on the Carol Danvers book, just everything. Being an educator and an inspiration. I just love hearing from other writers and just trying to sponge off the creativity and the energy. And I just really appreciate that, Michael, that we are in a position where we can have people of Kelli's caliber and Derek and everybody else.
We know one of the universe's preeminent experts on Captain Marvel.
Yes,
I could say that to people. Oh, I'm colleagues with the preeminent expert on Captain Marvel.
And awesome. We get so many great guests, including you, Kelli. And so like as a nascent, I don't know what the right pronunciation is on that, acquisitions editor, I'm like, I wish I could suddenly will myself to have like a big pile of money that I can start doing really cool projects to get all you people involved and just make some amazing stuff. And it's like, how do I make that leap? And I'm not quite there yet. And I've been noodling on it for a couple of years now. And it's like, I feel like I'm getting close to something, but it's not quite there yet. But thank you for being here. Thank you for your inspiration and your energy. Do not stop writing. If you get that dream gig of a Star Trek novel or a Star Wars novel or something, don't let that be the pinnacle of your career. You've got so much more to do, and I enjoy reading everything that you make. So please don't ever stop. That's true for all writers, but especially true for you because you're right in front of me.
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. That means so much.
All right, the conversation continues. I'm sure we'll have Kelli back again in the future. IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. We'll talk to you all next time.
Thank you so much.